To the G5 Hive in our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, who finished 8-5 last season and capped off their 2023 season with a win over Old Dominion in the famous Toastery Bowl. Sorry, Justice. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. The Tower Rack is an independent WKU blog. He is the head editor of that blog. When he isn't blogging, he's the owner and partner at Safeguard Insurance there in Bowling Green. He is Matt McCay. Matt can be found at the Tower Rack WKU on X. Welcome to the show, Matt.
What's going on, guys?
We are happy to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how the Tower Rack started, how you got to be a part of the Tower Rack, and how long you've been covering the Hilltoppers? I know that was a lot of questions all in one.
Yeah, so I guess about me. So I've been a WKU fan basically my entire life. I grew up, my whole family has gone to Western, and I went to games when I was like one. We used to live across the railroad tracks from the stadium, and we would cross over the tracks before they had all the extra stuff on the stadium, and we'd walk in and watch games. And so been super passionate about WKU my whole life, and a proud topper. But the Tower Rack is an independent blog. We're not affiliated with WKU. We're not tied into anything or have to spend the give the WKU spin. We're completely independent. We came from Wave the Red Towel was another group that had started, and it kind of splintered off, and then they started the Tower Rack. I actually wasn't with the Tower Rack when it first began, but we've been doing what we do for about 9 years now. We have a podcast. We do articles. We do live tweets of every game that we can in all sports. And we're free. We don't charge anything. We don't have a subscription, nothing like that. We're just doing it for fun. And so we love what we do, and it's a passion project, and we just want people to know about WKU.
Awesome. So Will Friend takes over as the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach. He was previously the offensive line coach at Mississippi State. He spent some time as offensive coordinator from 2015 to 2017 at Colorado State. In 2017, Colorado State was 11th in the nation in total offense, just under 493 yards per game. And then they scored 33.4 points per game, which was good for 31st in the nation. Will he be calling the plays there for the Hilltoppers in 2024, or will it be head coach Tyson Helton?
That's an interesting question because Helton has had a history, whether it was public information or not, of kind of taking over and then not and then backing off. And so I'll be interested to see how that works out. I would guess a guy with such experience and everything, his job is to come in and coordinate the offense. So I would think that he would start out calling the plays, but if there are issues or Tyson doesn't exactly like how things are called, then I wouldn't be surprised if he took over. But I think a friend is a very impressive looking resume type of coach to come to WKU. So obviously I would hope that he turns it over to him. I think Hilton's more of a CEO type of, that's really kind of his strength. And so I think hopefully he'll let Friend call some plays, but I guess we'll see how it goes, and I'm sure he'll adjust accordingly.
How would you describe this offense that we can expect to see here in 2024 with the new OC?
Well, I don't know if I'm sure Friend is going to bring some wrinkles of his own and everything and some new ideas, but basically WKU under Helton has had an air raid type of offense, tons of passes, run the ball to keep people honest, use the running backs in the passing game kind of thing. And so I imagine it'll be more of the same there. I do think WKU has a few running backs, and we have either quarterback that is probably the favorite can run. So there could be some wrinkles there. At times, WKU's kind of had a statue of a pocket passer, and so there wasn't really a lot of prospect to be able to run the ball with the quarterback. But I imagine typical air raid, air the ball out. Hopefully some receivers will step up from the loss of some people that have left, and WKU be able to air the ball out.
Well, that's what we like to hear. But who is going to air that ball out? So let's get to that position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Now, Matt, there is a web to untangle here, so I'm going to need your help to decipher this, and I might be off a little bit on my timeline, so keep me honest. So, last season starter Austin Reed is off to the NFL. I think he's with the Bears now. Now, for those who are not familiar with Western Kentucky, we're going to break it down. For the bowl game, Turner Helton started. He threw an interception pretty early in that game. Quarterback Caden Veltkamp was told at the end of the regular season that he would be moved to tight end, but he enters the transfer portal, but stays on for the bowl game. He ends up playing in relief for Helton. He ends up then going 40 of 52 for 343 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 INT. Then Veltkamp withdraws from the portal. I mean, those are pretty good stat lines from a tight end. TJ Finley then transfers in about a month later. He comes in from Texas State. And let's not forget that the guy who started the bowl game, Turner Helton, returns. What should we make of all of that going into 2024?
I don't know. It was confusing because the intel from known and unknown or unannounced sources or whatever was that I had a guy that's from Greenville, Kentucky, which is a little west of here, and he didn't just say that quote unquote Caden is done. He said Caden is done. Like he kind of twisted the word a little bit for some emphasis. So it was interesting because he was saying like, well, Caden's checked out or whatever. He's not a real prospect to be the quarterback, and then he comes in and does what he did in the bowl game. It was interesting to say the least. It was really out of nowhere, and all I had heard was he's not really going to play a factor and not going to do anything. Turner Helton had looked good in games, and other spring practices, whatever. Seemed like it made some sense. He's the coach's nephew, so that doesn't hurt, but I don't think that the locker room would allow for him to have earned the start. I mean, you're going to have an insurrection if you're just like throwing in your family without good reason. So I imagine he earned it in practice. And I think Caden just kind of, Caden Veltkamp just kind of stepped up in the game and made something happen. He's always had a lot of talent. He's a big guy. He's 6'5", 6'6". I mean, he's a big guy and he can run and has a good arm and all that. But another factor that I would say is also TJ Finley from Texas State comes in, and he has Group of Five experience, starting experience, played in the Power Five, started a few games, and so he's interesting too. My gut and the feel from experience. I was a quarterback manager with the Western football team for a little bit, and usually the experience won out, even though Veltkamp had the one flashy game. There are other things that factor in. So my gut kind of says that, and I think that a lot of local Bowling Green people will probably be upset about it, considering that Veltkamp is a local South Warren High School product, which is Bowling Green local high school, and so I think they'll be upset. But honestly, I think Finley probably wins the job. I'd say he's probably the one starting. Veltkamp, though, I think is certainly proven that he can play, and that you shouldn't be too worried if he does end up playing, or if Finley gets hurt, or say Finley comes in and he's not incredible. You have an option to try out. But my gut from just really reading the tea leaves and knowing how it works, I think it'll be Finley starting against Alabama if things go well. But I certainly could be wrong, and things could change too. You don't know how things go in camp, and certainly Veltkamp is a gamer. He obviously showed that. He comes in and blows it away under the lights. So maybe that's what he does again.
He certainly did. I got to watch that in person. I think I still have PTSD from it, but that's another subject. Moving on to the running game, the Hilltoppers lose two guys, in Marquise Stepp and Davion Irvin Poindexter, who both graduated, but they do bring back their leading rusher from a year ago, and Elijah Young, as well as LT Sanders. What should we expect from this room here in 2024 in terms of workload? You think it's going to, typically it's been a split. You think that's what we're going to see again here?
Probably. I've always liked LT Sanders. As soon as he got a chance to play a little bit, I thought he was a nice looking young prospect. He made some plays. He kind of, broke tackles, whatever. You like to see some talent kind of flash early, and he certainly did that. He had a couple of injuries and things like that kind of kept him from really busting out and those kinds of things. But I like Elijah Young too. He was a Power 5 transfer and everything, and he had a few hundred yards last year, led the team, but it was on like 400 and something yards. It was a lot of running back by committee, and WKU only averaged 105 yards a game. So it really wasn't a great running attack. Obviously, you hope that those two guys can kind of bolster the running game and really be able to produce something. I think the run blocking was an issue last year. Even though the offensive line, they only gave up 12 or 13 sacks or something. It was a really low number. But I think a lot of that was Austin Reed was kind of a master at escaping some pressure, and they really had trouble opening up running lanes. So hopefully the offensive line comes together and helps out the running backs. I'm also concerned about who after those two guys for sure can come in and contribute something, because I don't really see any proven commodity besides those two. And LT even Elijah Young too. You need one of those guys to step up and be a near 1,000-yard rusher, or you need to have multiple other guys step in and do something. So a little concerning, but I think there's enough there that you're not terrified, but it is a position of concern.
Do you think so? Do you think like going into the season, we're looking at like a 50-50 workload between Sanders and Young, or a 60-40, or?
I would say probably Young seems to be the preferred back there. I don't know if it would be much more than 60-40, but Helton always says that he wants a bell cow. He wants a guy that can take over and basically do it unless he's exhausted. But it's never happened. it usually ends up being pretty split. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I'd guess 60-40, maybe a little more than that if Young is really clicking.
So you had someone that came in the spring and added some depth, and then they turned around and transferred out shortly after spring ended, and that was running back Teron Keith. Is there anything we should make about that? It's happened to other places too, where a guy comes in and leave. Our natural assumption is like he didn't think he was going to get the playing time he wanted, but
Yeah, that'd be my guess. I mean, there are already those two established. There may be maybe someone else in there that he felt like he was behind as well. I mean, maybe he wanted to be the guy, come in and kill it, and just didn't happen. I was looking at that, and I know he transferred to USF, right? So he's
South
closer to
Florida.
home. He's from Florida. I mean, that could have been a factor. He
Absolutely.
just didn't feel like there was enough there to stay in Bowling Green. I mean, it happens, and a lot of these kids have transferred 3 or 4 times, and so they just call it good if they don't like it and roll out. So I'm not super concerned about it. Go ahead, man.
Well, the passing game is a staple of WKU. They lost a key guy in the Yak King, first team All AAC, an NFL third-round draft pick to the New York Jets in Malachi Corley. Jimmy Holiday transferred to Louisiana Tech. Craig Burt Jr. is also out of eligibility. Dalvin Smith, Easton Messer, Katie Hutchinson are their core guys that are going to be back this year. How did that group look in the spring, and did anyone stand out to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, Dalvin Smith has always been interesting. He's always produced whenever he's been given an opportunity. He had 2 ridiculous catches in the bowl game. One was like a cyborg, ridiculous, like backhanded. I don't even know how it was, and he kept running and made it to the corner. And then the other one, he, had a nice, one-on-one battle that he won and caught it one-handed. I mean, he's really talented.
He's massive too, man. That was the thing that stood out to me the most.
He's big. He's tall. He's tiny in terms of he's not thick. So he potentially. I've been kind of surprised they didn't get more beat up in terms of physically, but yeah, he's an interesting prospect, and I'd love to see him bust out and really be a dominant receiver. He's never quite 100% gotten there yet. Certainly a good prospect, and then I really like Easton Messer too. He even though he was on the scout team a lot first little bit, but this last year because of injuries, he got his chance and he really stepped up and was really impressive. And so I feel good. And Katie Hutchinson, some of these other guys, some other decent looking backups. I mean, I'm not super concerned, but there's kind of the unknown. And last year it was really the whole team. I don't know if y'all knew this, but every position group had an injury last year where they missed at least one game. Every single position group. And so that's a huge factor in all this is like who's going to be healthy? Can we have a year where we don't have devastating injuries? Because for a 3 or 4 game stretch there, kind of beginning to middle of the year, we had the top 5 or 6 receivers not even eligible to play because of injury. I mean, it was ridiculous. So who knows exactly where all those guys are, but yeah, a decent top 3 or so, and then you should be able to fill it in from there.
Well, Malachi Corley leaves 115 targets, 984 yards, and 11 touchdowns behind. How do you think that production gets split up here in 2024?
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. And he didn't really, because of injuries, I think, mainly. And I think there were a few players that were supposed to do something and really didn't. I don't necessarily want to name names and call them out as whatever, but there were some Power 5 guys that just didn't pan out for whatever reason, people that started and then didn't end up playing most of the rest of the year. Some people didn't even really see the field. And so those guys were expected to fill it in. Plus, Michael Matheson was injured, who was a productive receiver the year before. So if you got fantasy listeners or watchers, maybe Matheson will be a nice little risk play there. Who knows if he's back or not? But it's definitely a question mark because Malachi kind of did it on his own and still produced nearly 1,000 yards. Didn't have wonderful blocking up front, all that kind of stuff, and still was able to be really productive. But again, where does it come from this year? You're not necessarily guaranteed to know.
So you mentioned Matheson's injury. Have you heard about how that recovery is going there, and what do you think we can expect from him in 2024, assuming he's fully healthy?
Yeah, honestly, I really don't know a ton about his injury. I know I don't think he really did anything in the spring. I don't know. I really don't know exactly where that's at. But I do know if he's available, he was really productive as a young player. Kind of smaller guy, probably would function a lot like Corley did. And really nice piece that we missed last year. If you think about adding him back in and maybe he gets 700-800 yards or whatever, it would have opened up the offense a lot more. So if he's available, it's a big difference for sure. Could be a number one receiver if he's healthy.
Well, how do you expect this wide receiver room to shake out this season? And will we see a target hog like we have in the past with Corley and Stearns and guys like that?
I don't know. That's kind of the question of the day. You don't know where that's going to come from because Dalvin Smith probably should be that guy, but he hasn't necessarily fully executed that. He's probably left some things on the table. Really, each year his first year he was productive in touchdowns, but didn't really do a whole lot else. They used him in the red zone, and then his role has grown. But you don't necessarily know, can he really be the number one? Easton Messer, he's a small guy, kind of twitchy, and a lot like Stearns in this style of play and catch a lot of balls and make people miss. And he's a playmaker. But is he ready to be a full-time starter? You worry about his size. I mean, there are question marks with each of them exactly who's going to step up. Maybe it probably would be more of a by committee thing, but you don't know with TJ Finley who he clicks with. I mean, he might just come in and love Messer or love one of these other guys, Dalvin Smith, whoever it is, River Helms. I don't even know. Might love a tight end. I have no clue, and it could really change the whole dynamic of the offense.
Speaking of the tight ends, how would you describe the usage of tight ends in this offense for someone that maybe hasn't caught a game before?
Well, it's definitely different than when Willie Taggart was the coach and it was the West Coast and we had 3 of them out there half the time. It's definitely much less of a role. They'll, depending on how good the offensive line is, they might use them more to chip and then possibly contribute. I really like River Helms. I like Borland as well. But I think Helms has some ability, some pass catching ability, and Borland's more of a bigger body and everything. And I like some of the pieces that they added. It seems like they have enough that somebody should be able to step up because sometimes they've only had maybe 3 or 4 on the whole team anyway. Now I noticed they have 5 or 6, and so maybe there will be enough from that batch of guys that somebody can step up and really contribute. But I would say unless they find, gold somewhere. Like a few years ago, we had Joshua Simon, who transferred to South Carolina and was super productive, and you kind of just have to get him the ball. If you don't have a guy like that that's dynamic, then it's not a huge feature, but they exist, I guess.
Last season it seemed like Brewer Helm certainly had times where he seemed to shine. Do you think he's kind of the leader in that room heading into 2024, or?
I would think so, yeah. Unless there's some kind of surprise, you don't hear a ton about the tight ends, so it's kind of hard to know where every single player is within that room. But he definitely seems to be the one that has had the most flashes and made some nice plays, and you notice his blocking is pretty good. It's one of those things that will keep people on the field. He's a pretty solid player and has pretty good potential. And WKU's had some good tight ends in the past make the pros, so it can be a big feature of the offense.
Well, this offensive line lost their center Vincent Murphy to Tulane. Right tackle Wes Dorsey transfers to UCF, but they brought back left guard Quantavious Leslie, right guard Wesley Horton, and left tackle Marshall Jackson. How does this group look going into 2024?
Well, I know that that's really concerning to lose some of those big names, and Wes Dorsey. I met him at a football banquet. That guy's hands ate mine alive, and I'm a big guy, but he just had these huge, massive hands. He's a big dude, bigger than some of the ones we had when we were first transitioning into the FBS when I was there. He was just a big guy. So you're going to miss some of those big Power 5 type bodies, those guys that can transfer to a quote unquote higher level or whatever. We've had a few the past few years though, and it seemed like they've picked up the pieces. And this year, or this year's version of the team, I feel like there's enough there to know that you're probably going to be pretty okay. Seems like there are some decent transfer options. There's a couple guys that are really solid, and on an offensive line, you need a few guys that are really, really good. And then if you have guys that just don't suck, you'll be okay, so hopefully there's no like major hole in the offensive line. And I feel like they're in a pretty good spot, but again, there are a lot of questions with this team. You just don't know.
So you talked about this maybe being a concern, but who do you think is going to take over there at center and right tackle?
I really don't know. I know they've played with a lot of different guys, and they're willing to move guys around. I don't necessarily have a prediction on exactly who fills in each position, but I do know that Quantavious Leslie is he's a really solid piece. Marshall's had some good moments. I just feel like there are plenty of options. Just knowing, I guess from experience, we used to have guys that they were experimenting well into camp, trying to figure out exactly who could slide in a certain spot. You just need guys that have a brain, that have an idea of where they're supposed to go, and it'll work out. I feel pretty solid about it. I just don't know where everybody's going to end up.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah, I was struggling to pick one. And so I wrote down a few, maybe by position. I really like Helms. I think if he can click into place, it's a really nice weapon. We haven't had a solid tight end that was healthy in several years. I really like Messer. He always seemed to, even in a spring game, he was making really nice plays. He seemed to go up and get the ball, even though he's got, lesser size. And I like the running backs. I've always liked LT Sanders, and I like Elijah Young. I think any of those guys could have a breakout year. I don't know. I couldn't commit on that one. I don't have a strong feeling on one of them. But those are guys that I would watch for sure. All of them have some potential to be really good players immediately.
Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about those guys up front along that defensive line. Keontae Davis has run out of eligibility, but about everyone else is back from 2023. How did that unit look, and what do you think we can expect here from them in 2024?
Well, I think there are some good players there, but we really need to see somebody step up and be that super productive defensive line guy. Jaquez Evans, he was a linebacker, but he did that a lot, produced a ton. And also, if you look at the stats for WKU, they used Kendrick Simpkins, who was a DB, and he had like 7.5 sacks and 11 tackles for loss, and I think it was like 7 QB hits. It was a really bizarre stat line for a DB, but it tells you that they pretty much couldn't get pressure up front. They're not going to use a guy that much and risk so much loss of coverage if they're not desperate to figure out a way to get pressure. So I would definitely say, especially in a 3-3-5, you're going to have trouble generating pressure unless you have every player that's playing is doing something. And so they need some guys. I don't think there was anybody besides Simpkins who had more than like 4 or 5 sacks. You need somebody that is a playmaker that can bust things up. Maybe, D tackle getting 5 or 6 sacks and forcing some fumbles and just blowing up plays. You need that. So again, it's there are options, and you see some talent there, some nice transfers, big bodies, some length. Deontay McCray, who was an interesting guy, and some other. But I mean, he's got a nice big body, and he was really close on some play. I think he had 7 hits, but didn't have a ton of sacks. So there's some guys there, but somebody's got to step up and make it happen. It's been a while since WKU had a true defensive line stud.
So you talk about somebody needing to step up. Who do you think can be that guy that steps up this year?
Defensive line wise, you're saying defensive line? Yeah. I had Deontay McCray as the guy. I kind of mentioned it there. He's 6'4", so legit size and everything. But he had 7 QB hits, and I forget how many. Let's see. He had 3 or 4 sacks. So he didn't quite get home. But you would think the next step would be actually landing those and getting them down, or making a few more plays or whatever. So that feels like a guy that could really step it up. He was pretty close. You just want to see him finish it off.
So moving over to the linebackers, they lost quite a few guys. Desmond Baker and then the aforementioned Jaquez Evans and Aaron Key all went to the portal. Nico Cooper and Bryson Washington have graduated. They do bring back some players like Kylan Guidry, Sebastian Benjamin, Anthony Brackenridge, and others. What can we expect from this linebackers group here in 2024?
Yeah, well, Jaquez Evans is like the headline there for sure as a loss. He chose to leave and went to Baylor, and good for him. Can't be mad at him. He had an injury this year. He really didn't play this last year, not really. But when he did, he was super impactful. He probably single-handedly made sure USF didn't come back. And had a really nice game there, but then he was injured most of the rest of the season. And so you feel his impact and you wish that he would have stayed. But honestly, he wasn't a part of the team last year, and it was functional enough to win 8 games. So you think that it feels like a huge losses everywhere in the linebacking core, but I feel like there's enough there. Who was it? Guidry was leading tackler last year. He's back. There's a guy, Terrence Ellis looks like a good playmaking transfer kind of guy. If you look at kind of his stat lines and stuff, I like to see, especially with linebackers, you want to see people that produce, whether it's tackles, whether it's big interceptions or forced fumbles or something like that's what I want to see from their history. And it seems like there's some guys there. Chandler Matthews is another guy. I think he's from like Limestone College or something like that. But he had a bunch of tackles and whatever. So there could be enough there in the linebackers to still be, I think, pretty solid.
Do you think any of those guys are kind of in that Jarquez Evans mold in terms of, a good tackler and able to get good pass rush, or do you think they're probably all just more kind of the tackler variety?
I know Terrence Ellis made some plays. But it was more kind of typical linebacker type of plays. I don't know if I see his nickname was Donut. It's kind of funny, but Donut Evans. I don't know if I see somebody like him. And he was really unique. That guy had like 100 tackles.
Yeah, he
still
did.
produced nearly 10 sacks. The guy's sideline to sideline and up the field. I mean, he was just everywhere. And it was just, I don't know how you find somebody like that. He was really a unique talent, especially at the group of five level. Like, he was ridiculous. And I don't know if people appreciated him as much because they had to use him in so many different ways. They kind of had to pick exactly what role he played when. But he was so versatile. So you miss him, but how much do you miss him? I don't know, because he wasn't there this last year.
Well, the defensive backfield was hit by the portal. Western Kentucky lost their top two leading tacklers from a year ago, and the aforementioned Kendrick Simpkins and Talik Allen, and along with TJ Springer. They all transferred out, and then you got, is it Takulve? Is that how you pronounce that? Takulve
I believe
Williams?
so. Yeah.
All right. Rome Weber and then Davion Williams, they're all out of eligibility. Those are a lot of losses. Now, don't get me wrong. They have some experienced guys coming back, like Anthony Johnson Jr. He was in the portal briefly. He withdrew. You got Virgil Marshall and Upton Stout. But this room is young. How did that staff address these losses in the secondary?
Well, first of all, I think the two biggest wins for this group was keeping Johnson Jr. and Upton Stout. Upton Stout was basically going to commit to Michigan and decided not to. And then Johnson Jr. too, he entered the transfer portal and decided to stay. Those were two of the biggest producers in the secondary. And I think Johnson, he had 3 games he was out for injury and still was incredibly productive, and he got increasingly productive later in the year if you look at stat lines and everything. And Upton Stout also dealt with some injury stuff. So if those two guys could be healthy, I mean, Upton Stout was all conference level talent for sure. It's a little undersized, but I thought it was funny that I can't remember who it was, but they decided they were going to pick on him. And I'm like, go ahead. Like, why are you picking on him? He's a good, solid player. But whatever, that was their issue, not mine. But you asked about who resolves those question marks. I mean, you have transfers from Nicholls State, Texas A&M, Troy, Ole Miss, Tulane. There's some solid options there in the transfer portal, and I think WKU has a pretty good history in the transfer portal in general, and I think that's why I generally trust the process here and kind of know that they generally do a pretty good job. And there may be a few spots that end up being a little weak, but I think it's ultimately going to work most of itself out.
All right. If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just have trouble making decisions, but I don't know if Anthony Johnson counts because he was a solid player anyway. But I felt like he was the biggest proven playmaker that probably could have done even more. he had those injuries that kept him from really being able to be a consistent player. And I think early in the year he was still getting his footing. So I feel like if now that he's got he's really got a feel for what's going on, how things work. We got the same defensive coordinator, all those kinds of things. I mean, should be in a pretty good position to really have a true breakout year. I like him. I think I like Terrence Ellis. I like what I see from just having an idea of what he does as well. And I like him too. And Deontay McCray was the other name I had written down. So I already talked about them a little bit.
So with the spring practice now over, which position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning?
Yeah, I had a few written down. I think the biggest concern is the D line. It's been a while since WKU, like I said, has had a true defensive lineman that's super productive. A few years ago, there was Juwan Jones and D'Angelo Malone got drafted. He was a linebacker though, but again, he was kind of like a donut guy that was just everywhere.
Yeah.
But the problem is that WKU doesn't seem to get those big defensive linemen, so that a guy like Donut or a guy like D'Angelo could actually do what they would be great at, which would be kind of roaming around and wreaking havoc. So if there could be someone or several someones or just a really solid group that shows up, it'd be a massive difference. But I'm concerned that it may be another year that they have to cobble together pressure. I also wrote down the running back depth is concerning because there's only two guys there that are kind of known to be pretty decent. And then receiver, losing Corley. And also added punter. A few years ago, we had John Haggerty, he just boomed the ball. It was ridiculous. It was an Australian punter guy, and I mean, he would launch it 50, 60 yards, no problem. Perfect spiral. It was beautiful. And it made a huge difference in everything, defensively, offensively, whatever. And we lost the other punter we had from last year, Tom Ellard, and so it's kind of a question mark. There was a year that we had atrocious punting. It really made a difference. And so hopefully punting's not a disaster, but we'll see.
Now the transfer portal's pretty much winding down. There's a couple people that are probably still around. I'm sure if there's a big name that goes out there, people will be going after them. I'm not sure on how the scholarship situation there is at WKU. Is there anything that the coaching staff may be looking to add to the team here before the season gets going?
Yeah, I don't pretend to know the scholarship situation. I don't know exactly what cards they have to play there, but I mean, I would say the three that I mentioned besides punter, I don't think they're going to go into the transfer portal, but maybe if they're really concerned. But running back, receiver, D line, I would think, unless they feel good about maybe the receivers. I don't know where they're at on the receivers. Maybe they're fine, but I think running back is kind of shaky unless they have some kind of secret weapon there. And the D line too. I mean, I'd love to see someone that's kind of a proven commodity come in any of those positions, but we'll see.
What would you say is the main strength of this team?
I mean, I think one thing, even though there are some concerns, I feel like every position has a reasonable answer to it. I don't think there's any major hole where you're just like, good God, I don't know how that's going to work out. Like this is a disaster type of position. They've done a good job having possible options. Now, sometimes they fall through and it ends up not being as deep as you think it should be. And last year was a good example where injury just ruined everything. I mean, it was horrible. It was the worst injury-ridden season I can ever remember at WKU. But I think that's a major strength is just, especially in football, you just don't want anyone to be horrible. on the team. Like that's where they can take advantage. If you have people that are solid, then you have a pretty good shot. I think that's kind of where WKU's at. There could be some issues, but there's enough there to feel pretty solid that it's not going to be a completely horrible season and could be pretty decent.
Now, when it comes to the recruitment of new players and the retention of existing players, how has the NIL and the transfer portal impacted Western Kentucky?
I'm glad you asked that because Hilton has kind of gotten a reputation as being the portal king. He's had some national articles that were written about him embracing the portal. He takes a different approach than, trying to convince people or try to do any kind of underhanded tactic. He really just tells the players, like, here's where you're at with us, and if you want to go shop, go shop. He's very open. And I think what it's done is it's bred a lot of success in the portal, both seeing, like, there were a couple of examples in the secondary where these guys checked it out and then came back anyway. Craig Burt was a guy that, at receiver the last couple of years. He went in the portal just about every year and decided to come back every year. Beltkamp was another example of someone went in the portal and decided to stay. So he's allowing them to check it out. Hey, if you find an opportunity you feel like makes sense, go for it. But we'd like to have you here if we can, and here's the conditions for you to be here. It's way more open, and I think it's really helped both keep good players and show other players from the outside that, hey, this will be a decent place for you to go. You're going to get treated fairly.
Well, it seems more and more that the demands of a head coach are really turning into more of a general manager type role between recruiting high school players, recruiting your own roster, trying to retain those guys, fundraising, etc. And maybe they're less involved in the X's and O's. Do you see that happening there at Western Kentucky with Coach Helton, or is he trying to do it all? Does he have help? Or
I think he's got a good system in place. Got good staff. He's a really good administrator. That's one major strength. It seems like he's able to delegate, and even some of the stuff that probably would get neglected, things that may be off the field type stuff. I think they do a really good job with a lot of those areas. And I think he does a good job delegating and finding good replacements for staff that leave. A lot of times you talk about the transfer portal, also the coaching carousel is always crazy as well. And he does a good job finding decent replacements. Generally, those coaches work out pretty well. A few exceptions haven't been stellar, but they've always been good enough. And so I think he does. That's one of his main strengths. If you were talking about his weaknesses, maybe he has trouble executing on the higher level, like winning some of the big games. Last year, some decision-making concerns kind of crept in. Things like in game. I mean, and so I think, like, if you look back, there were several games in the last several years that just kind of like, what happened there? Like, how did none of these become a good result? Why can't you kind of kick down the door, so to speak? Like, there have been really good teams, but it seems like you have a throwaway game where you get blown out by North Texas by 27 randomly, and that's what you needed to make the championship game, whatever. So,
yeah, man, I know all about blowing 28-point leads. So.
Yeah, well, this one was just murder from the start. It was ugly, but yeah. Sorry to bring up 28-ish points in general. Sorry, buddy.
It's all right.
Well, Matt, let's fast forward. We're at the end of 2024. What has to happen in 2024 for you, for fans, for WKU to say that was a successful season?
Well, it's definitely getting time to see that ultimate success. I mean, he's been here. I think this is his 7th year, working on his 7th season. 2018 or 2019, whatever. He's right there where it's, at some point it's time to produce. Last year was a disaster in terms of you weren't going to win a championship with all those injuries, but it's kind of getting to that point that you'd like to see it happen. Let's get to the championship game. I know Liberty obviously is the clear favorite. They have the schedule that they go undefeated again and all that. But you'd like to see, if not in the championship game, you had an incredible season and got right there, right close to, third or better would be, I think, fairly successful. Problem is the schedule is really tough. If you break down the schedule, it's one of the tougher schedules that WKU's had in a while. And so you're going to get most likely going to get beat up in the non-conference. You've got some tough matchups. You kind of drew the short end of the stick on having to play certain teams within conference and where you play them and all that. And so it's going to be a tough road, but I feel like ultimately it's probably about an 8-win season. But there's a range there that I think it could go as low as maybe 6, and I think it could go as high as 11 potentially if everything went absolutely perfect.
And you talk about that schedule just for the listeners. You got to go to Alabama, then you've got Eastern Kentucky at home, go to Middle Tennessee. Toledo comes over and visits you guys. Then you go to Boston College. Then you got UTEP visits. Then you go to Sam Houston. Then Kennesaw State comes to visit. Then you go to New Mexico State. La Tech comes in, and then you go to Liberty and finish out with a homestand against Jacksonville State. So,
yeah, I mean, a lot of those teams too, especially in conference, will likely be improved. I think Sam Houston's one to watch. I really like them a whole lot. They had a great defense and just a garbage offense last year, or they would have been very competitive. And so if they take any kind of step forward, that's just an example of one in Conference USA that probably would step up.
Yeah, I think we agree with you. I mean, I feel like Luke and I have talked about before. I think they were a team that I would say was snake bitten last year, where they were a much better team than their record indicated.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. So definitely keep an eye on them.
We've talked a lot today. We've talked offense, defense. We even talked about punters. But is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about this 2024 Hilltopper football team?
I mean, I'd say, watch out. I think I feel good about where it is, and I trust Helton in that it's not going to be terrible for sure. And I think that there's a complete realm of possibility to likelihood that WKU is right there competing for a championship. And so I think that WKU athletics in general was in a really good spot. A lot of good things going on. There's a lot of momentum. And I feel like it could be time to cash in on it in football. We'll see. Liberty's a huge obstacle. They're like I said, improvement, tough schedule, whatever, but we'll see how it shakes out. But I would say don't completely count WKU out as a possibility as a group of 5 representative or very close to that.
Well, Matt, thank you again for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. My pleasure.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.